All eyes on Washington tonight. President Barack Obama takes to the airwaves in a very important primetime address, detailing what he says a comprehensive strategy to bring down the militant group ISIS. The White House has just released a couple of excerpts of this speech saying the president will try to build a broad coalition. We will, quote, degrade and ultimately destroy ISIL through a comprehensive and sustained counterterrorism strategy. But he will say that I want the American people to understand how this effort will be different from wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. It will not involve American combat troops fighting on foreign soil. The counterterrorism campaign will be waged through a steady and relentless effort to take out ISIL wherever they exist using our air power and our support for partner forces on the ground. The strategy of taking out terrorists who threaten us while supporting partners on the front line is one we've successfully pursued in Yemen and Somalia for years. That's what the White House is signaling tonight. What did we make of it? Let's find out. Colin Robertson is the Vice President and Senior Research Fellow at the Canadian Defence and Foreign Affairs Institute and a former diplomat. Good to see you here. And Mohamed El Rashidy is the spokesperson for the Canadian Arab Federation. Colin, now we're getting signals of what we're going to see from the President. What do you make of what he's about to say?
Well, as we learned in the Balkans, you can do airstrikes, but eventually you have to have boots on the ground. And if it's not American boots on the ground, then who? The Americans have formed a coalition. It's 9 NATO members in Australia. The significant one within the NATO coalition is Turkey. The Turks are providing some support to the Kurds. Can you go further? What about the Saudis? What about the Arab League? We want to see where the Arab League, are they prepared to put in? If you look back, George H.W. Bush in Iraq War I had a much broader coalition. I think that's what they have to do, and that's what Secretary Kerry is going to be doing over the next week, is to try and build that larger coalition. What you do not want is crusaders on the ground. What you want are, bluntly, Muslim nations involved in this, taking it on.
Well, you're absolutely right. For a president that ran against George W. Bush, he sounds a lot now like George H. Bush, the father, right now, in terms of this coalition of the willing that the first Gulf War he built. But Mohamed El Rashidy, where are you when you hear what the president is about to do? What's your reaction?
Well, remember, he did run on the anti-Iraq platform, so he's got a tight rope to walk. But as Colin alluded to the Kosovo War, this was February '98 to June of '99. Bill Clinton looked like a genius when he was able to achieve his goals of removing Milosevic from the Kosovo region just with airstrikes. So it looks like he's going to try and mimic that. I would have used that in this speech. I wouldn't have used Somalia and Yemen. Those are disasters. But at the same time, he's got a lot of pressure at home to act. As we heard Neil MacDonald, there's fear back at home. There's a lot of pressure to act. So he's going to need to use the regional powers, without a doubt. I think it's very important to lend a hand, because there's regional anger towards the U.S. There's a lot of responsibility in the view of the population there, Evan, that because of the 2003 invasion of Iraq, this is all a result of it. So he's going to have to play up the fact that ISIS actions are not only un-Islamic, but are anti-Islamic, and therefore it is a duty for Muslims in the region to rise up against it, particularly that ISIS is causing a lot of public relation disasters with their actions. So he'll have to balance that provocation and disturbing actions of ISIS with the fact that by overreacting and by taking a very heavy hand to ISIS, you're playing into their strategy. ISIS's goal is to gain legitimacy. And when a president of the United States addresses you, you now have legitimacy. So he really needs to work on putting them in their place and treat them as a riffraff of terrorists, an extremist group that has to be dealt with as such.
You know, one of the differences between the Gulf War with the coalition of the willing, Colin, and you know that time very, very well, was there were some objectives. And the objective was very clear. They were not interested. They were going to protect Kuwait. They were not going to go in and topple Saddam Hussein then. Okay? This is the father. Here, what is the goal? I mean, Stephen Harper's now joined the coalition. I'm reading an article back in 2003 where he wrote in the Wall Street Journal he supported the war in Iraq, George Bush #2. What is the goal? In other words, how do you avoid deepening the involvement in this crisis?
Well, I think the goal, as the President points out, is to degrade and ultimately destroy ISIS. And you do that with the coalition. But I think that it's a bigger issue because, of course, ISIS and radical Islam is not just involved in Syria and Iraq. You're seeing this in Northern Africa. You're seeing this in Nigeria. It's also a threat. This is one where a coalition really does have to be bigger. This probably involves, ultimately, because this will be a longer campaign. This is going to be something that is going to outlive the presidency of Barack Obama. This probably involves the Russians. They've had challenges with Chechens and the Chinese. Because remember, the Chinese in particular, Indians depend upon the Middle East for their energy supplies. If we're serious, then it's got to be more than just the West versus. It should be a broader coalition. That includes countries which are currently adversaries on other issues.
All right. Yeah. Before that, yeah, go ahead, Mohamed.
Yeah, but I was going to say, you know, Obama's got a label to contend with that the Republicans were able to stick to him, which is leading from behind. And that is because he's slow at responding and sometimes seems like he doesn't have a strategy in foreign affairs. So this is a really good opportunity for him to have a very soft, easy target. ISIS is going to provide him with a lot of targets to take out and look like he's taking action. And that way he can, you know, fight for his legacy and not sound like a leading from behind type of leader. But again, he will be playing into ISIS's hand by playing into that narrative of West versus Islam and the extremist rhetoric that is coming out of there. But at the end of the day, Evan, this is a battle, I believe, that is going to be fought in the Muslim world. There's a very serious threat from radicalism and extremism. And I think that the region, and Muslims aren't just in the Middle East, they're throughout the world, are going to have to take initiative. And there's going to have to be, as Colin says, a coalition that involves Muslim countries to combat the ideas, not just the extremely disturbing actions of ISIS.
You may be right. I mean, the one thing about this conflict, it may involve all of the above. Colin, as someone who spent a lot of time working in the U.S. as a diplomat, what will you be watching for in the speech tonight?
Well, I'll be watching to see how he reaches out to Congress, because ultimately these wars have to be funded, and there is he's facing the midterms in a couple of months. A deeply polarized United States. Let's see how that plays out. He has to do some persuasion, not just to Republicans, but also members of his own party, many of whom are very anti-war and will be reluctant to see American involvement, notwithstanding the polls as they currently stand, because those polls were very different 4 months ago, and they will be very different 4 months from today.
Do you believe that what we see where the U.S. goes, that's a signal where Canada will follow?
Not in terms of the kind of operation. I mean, this is a superpower effort.
Right.
This is we are there, and that's important. We're one of the countries they want to build this because they do want to have a broader coalition of the willing, similar again to what George H.W. Bush was able to fashion. But it's got to be more than just NATO plus Australia. It's got to include members of the Arab League and other countries.
All right, I got to leave it there. Colin Robertson, Vice President and Senior Research Fellow at the Canadian Defence and Foreign Affairs, and Mohamed El Rashidy, spokesperson for the Canadian Arab Federation. Thanks so much to both of you, as we all are going to watch what President Obama says tonight, 9 p.m. Eastern. We'll carry it live. Of course, our ballot box question has been very much about this as our panel looks on. We have asked you, do you think that the U.S. can defeat ISIS within 3 years? You heard Colin Robertson and Mohamed El Rashidy both say that's the kind of timeline you're talking about. It's not 30 days, which is the Canadian reassessment period. It's 3 years or more. 15% of you said yes. 83% of you said no. 2% of you unsure. More than 400 of you voted. So let's watch the Obama speech.